Well, thank you all for joining me here. Thank you all for being here today. We have a very rich subject to talk about, and I was thinking about how to get into this conversation in a smart way. And I just want to be blunt for a moment about independent variables and dependent variables. I don't want to lose you in the equation, but when you think about what has changed, and we have a lot of people that have been coming to this conference here in Warsaw for years, as I have been, something big has changed, and that is Donald Trump was elected President of the United States for a second time, and Donald Trump 2 is not really a lot like Donald Trump 1, at least in the aggregate of his administration, and it is causing some reassessment of relationships. It's causing reassessment of President Trump's direction. There's a major earthquake going on in the world in national security and foreign policy as everyone tries to figure out what this is. But the cause is Donald Trump. So, Kiron, you had the job that I most wanted if I were ever to be in government again, and that is the George Kennan Mr. X job as Director of Policy Planning at the Department of State. For those of you who don't remember, there are many young people who don't remember the Cold War, don't remember George Kennan. Mr. X article in Foreign Affairs magazine, read it. It's still relevant today in many ways. But you had that position and job in the first Trump administration. And so I want to just ask you very simply, Kiron, what is Donald Trump's North Star when it comes to thinking about U.S. national security and foreign policy? Let's just hear what grand strategy of Donald Trump is going to be.
Well, let me start this way. I didn't have the best job. I wanted your job. And so the grass is always greener. And the Trump administration...
we could switch for a week if you get it back.
We can switch now. But what I'd like to say is that I think Donald Trump is not the cause. He's the effect. And so trying to get the variables straight is a big part of what I think has gone wrong for Europeans, for American elites, bipartisan elites, for transatlantic elites, for the media in general. There's been a sea change that's been going on in both the world and the United States in the 21st century. And I think that's what we're seeing. Had elites, especially American elites, address the structural issues that were facing the United States at the turn of the century, I don't think Donald Trump would ever have been elected.
Go a little bit deeper into it. I mean, I have relatives in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So Bartlesville is a little bit north of Tulsa. It's kind of a microcosm, I think, of Midwestern Americans who are loyal, patriotic. They're kind of oil and energy gas types, but they also believe in wind. I mean, they're evolved, but they have a lot of doubt about why America's doing what it's doing in the world. And so I just want to go a little bit deeper. What do you think got that patriotic American to doubt global engagement so much?
So that's where I was trying to go. I spent about 22 years in the industrial Midwest in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm from the Bay Area, and it was a surprise to me, but it was during the 2016 election that I watched Donald Trump and what was happening in that part of the world. Very different, the thought process, than the coastal elites in the U.S. and those in the D.C. Beltway. And they were feeling the effects of the structural problems that the Democrats and Republicans were ignoring. And while Hillary Clinton was at University of Pittsburgh talking to academic elites, Donald Trump was in Moon Township. The Amish were forming political action committees to support Donald Trump. Why? They didn't care that he'd been married 3 times. They wanted religious liberty. They wanted the government out of their way. The unemployment among poor white men, the drug addiction, all of this was being ignored by the so-called elites, the academics, the business leaders. Donald Trump came in and began talking about things, maybe not always right in detail, about the need for burden sharing with NATO, about restoring manufacturing in the U.S., about reshoring and nearshoring manufacturing, about ending endless wars. And it made sense to a large swath of Americans. And then he did it again last year in his election, but he did something different. He broadened the coalition of people who believe in conservative principles, I think for the first time, in creating a new American, potentially enduring coalition since FDR. He increased the number of African-American men substantially committed to the Republican Party. The same with Hispanics. He got folks in the cities and in the rural areas. I think he's reconstituting the New Deal coalition around a set of values and structural realities that elites have wanted to ignore because they were getting rich off the existing system that many of their predecessors helped form in the 1940s. So Trump's not the issue. It's why did we let this happen?
Right.
And that's what I think many don't want to have that conversation because it's a harder conversation. It means deeper think. It's easier to talk about Trump's daily antics than it is to talk about why he's even there.
Well, I appreciate you taking us there into those deeper things, and I hope we will talk about it. And I just want to put on the table that a lot of people don't understand another dimension of this is that they see the post-World War II order as one that enhanced America's power, and now we seem, you know, America was king of the hill and now kicking down its own hill, and so to some they don't understand. Well, we'll get back into that. I want to read you all something that Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff, who happens to be to my left, wrote, because I think it also helps set the stage for why what Kiron just laid out is so important to begin thinking about what this is doing for the world. And if I were to title this, I like the title here, Redefining Transatlantic Relations, but if I were to do that, I would call End of Illusions. And so Thomas has a line here, no one should be under any illusions about the dimensions of what lies ahead for Germany and Europe. America is likely not only to fall back into nationalism and isolationism, but also to lurch into unpredictability. For Trump, this is a tactic designed to produce quick results. But over the medium term, too, his country will become incalculable as a foreign policy player because the persistent polarization could foster a series of swings from liberal internationalist presidents to illiberal isolationist ones. I love the way you've kind of crystallized some of the impacts in dimension and just want to put that on the table because I think it fits perfectly the challenge we have today of understanding where we're at and where is Europe at, Thomas, reacting to what Kiron just laid out so beautifully.
Well, Kiron said Trump is not the issue. From a European perspective, I will say Trump is the issue. And it's, you said Trump is not the cause, but the effect, but you make it sound as if a cause can only have one effect. It cannot. So let me, you know, when you look at this from a European perspective, Trump in his first 100 and some days has threatened the territorial integrity of one member of the European Union. He has threatened punitive tariffs onto the European Union as such. He has declared the European Union as a threat to the United States, found it to harm the United States. I used to learn that was the Marshall Plan, but maybe I got that wrong. And you need to wake up every morning to the question of whether Donald Trump is now in bed with the enemy. Now, is that, you know, where do we stand? I heard a lot of diplomatic, including soft pedaling here on this stage. I think this is where we are. The question, we need to be intellectually honest about where we are. That still leaves the question of how you respond to it. The response is much more difficult than the analyses. But the analyses that an American administration comes out of the gates with the idea of a hemispheric imperialism is something in dealing with the United States for 35 years, could not have imagined. And this president seems to be bent on only accepting national power and not alliance power. Because if you look at the issue of Greenland, just as an example, he could get anything that any country, for security reasons that he proclaims this is about, it could get within the NATO alliance. Overflight rights, intelligence, stationing rights, that's all provided in the Danish-American Treaty from 1951, I believe. But he only builds on national power, and that makes me very skeptical about where we are in NATO.
So thank you for that. Let me bring in Eugeniusz here for a moment. You've written about your own concerns about this moment for European stability. And let me just play devil's advocate for a moment and ask the question that after 80 years, and I'll tell where I completely agree with Kiron, is that there were forces and dimensions in the United States where many Americans no longer remembered why the global social contract didn't need to be revised, that they felt like, you know, rightly or wrongly, a certain portion of people felt like losers in globalism, losers as the security guarantors in the world, and wanted to right-side that. But you said something very interesting. You see Trump in ways as an instigator of potential instability. My question is it not an opportunity, Genek, for Europe to begin moving so it's less dependent on outside forces, that it is more in control of its own fate and stars?
Absolutely. And that's what Radek Sikorski spoke here. And a lot have been done. The problem, first of all, there is a problem with President Trump as a person. And we've heard Mr. Biegun, who said that when he says something, he opens a debate. Well, President of the United States can open a debate talking to students at the university, but not in the White House. Because the words of the President of the United States are being listened to by allies and by enemies. And they draw their own conclusions. Thomas has spoken about the allies and the certain feeling of uneasiness concerning the US policies. But I am thinking in terms of the enemies, because politics is being made by people, and they make mistakes. Powers make mistakes. Big powers make occasionally tragic mistakes. The deterrence is based on predictability of behavior. So all sides, including the nuclear policy, all sides understand what will happen if something happens. Now, are we sure that we know what's going to happen? When we confront something which Thomas have alluded to, that means certain expectations from the allies, and an incredible patience with Mr. Putin. You know, this is something where we are in Warsaw. We cannot afford surprises. We cannot afford something that will change because something will change in the White House. It's Monday or Wednesday. I know that on the 16th of May, the US ambassador to NATO, Mr. Matthew Whitaker, announced the withdrawal of United States soldiers from Europe. He said that it will be gradual, it will be, you know, discussed with the allies. What does it mean? You do this, you know, you don't announce it. You talk to partners, you agree, you negotiate, and then you go together. I mean, this is not only, by the way, if we go into it, it's not only Mr. Trump. If you remember a Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Obama, he 4 times have changed, announcing from the White House, strategy in Afghanistan without consulting the allies. This is, you know, Radek Sikorski once quipped, if you go into bed with an elephant, be careful because at night he might turn, you know, in bed and crush you. We didn't leave the Soviet shithole in order to be crushed by an ally.
Well, Kiron, let me ask you to jump into this, and I think what I'd like to get at is courtesy of a former colleague of mine, Jeff Goldberg, many years ago at The Atlantic, got to see some of the kind of, you know, real thinking and real posturing of some of the, not everyone laid out plans within the famous Signal Gate. Those of you who don't know, Jeffrey Goldberg is editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. I could have believed that he was on an Obama national security email. I was stunned that somehow he fell into a Trump administration, you know, Signal chat. I think Kiron knows what I'm talking about. But in that space, we saw discussion of, particularly from Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, a real allergy about Europe, that it was not consistent with Europe to help bail out Europe with the Yemenis and to take this on, and that we needed to be remunerated by Europe. But it gets down to a question of what what is so important to America in the European relationship? Do transatlantic values matter? Do trade and commerce matter? What are the parts of the relationship that you think Donald Trump has faith in and wants to keep in place, and what do you think he wants to readjust?
Before I answer that, I want to respond to a couple of things that my co-panelists have said. One, I actually don't think deterrence requires predictability. If you think about modern world history since 1648, with the forming of the nation state, most of the time, the world was multipolar. It was bipolar for a very short period of time, roughly 45 to 1990. Most of the time, since 1648 to 1945, the world wasn't constantly at war. Because when you had multiple actors, there was a lot of uncertainty. And that made potential malign actors think twice because they didn't know what people would do. So I just think scientifically that's wrong, that you want predictability all the time. Sometimes the worst actors in the world need you to be unpredictable. And the world history record is one of multiple states doing very different things, often keeping the worst from doing the worst. On to your point about cause and effect, I never said there was one cause for Trump. I think it's multifactorial. The fact that the U.S. was basically crumbling as a nation, roads and bridges, unemployment, drug addiction, all of those led to people willing to give a maverick, a different kind of actor, a chance at the Oval Office. Not that they even agreed with everything that he had to say, but I think the Europeans need to understand we've been in trouble. And if we're weaker, the rest of the world is weaker. At our best and at our height in the 20th century, Europe was better. But I think it's been very difficult for our allies and partners to know this is a very different America that we're facing in the 21st century. There's been a lot of neglect, and the elites have done us often no good. So on to the point that you
on the values, and I have to just put it in a human emotional sense, a lot of people feel betrayed, trust has been damaged, and they feel as if it's hard to go back to that. So just love to get your sense on whether there's a values foundation that matters. What matters in the transatlantic relationship?
Yeah, so I do believe that values matters, and I do believe that Trump understands that values do matter, and I think he knows that he got elected in part because of that. So he's not working outside of the Western and American kind of political tradition. I just don't see that that's what he's attempting to do at all. But I think he's saying that values can't be at all, or we'd be in a different place. So talking the language of nation building, democracy promotion, human rights, when you're crumbling as a nation, what values are you talking about? And so the idea of America First, it's really the wrong title for what he's trying to say. He's saying the nation state is the core unit of analysis in the international system. Not that it's the best, but it is. Not multilateral institutions, not universal values, protecting the political and territorial integrity of the nation, and having policy be driven above all, but not alone, by the national interest. Why is that so radical? It is radical because we got so far away from it in the post-45 world. So that's a core principle of the Trump doctrine. And I think you can understand a lot of what's going on in Washington coming from the various principles of the Trump doctrine. The idea that we're going back and forth, you heard Signalgate, we're deciding policy aloud every single day in the Oval Office. That's happening because we haven't had a grand strategy in the 21st century. So you're watching it with social media, it's all happening, aloud. It's not being done in private rooms the way diplomacy was in the earlier in the previous century, but kind of too bad because we've got to figure it out.
Right, Thomas?
Let me respond to something that Kiron said. Now, I think she said something that is important and I believe is true when she said that the nation state becomes, if I don't want to quote you incorrectly, is relatively more important than universal values. Did I get that correctly?
No, I said there are no universal values without the nation state. If you've got a crumbling nation state system where there's no political and territorial integrity, talk about global human rights all day, and it doesn't exist. I mean, using the term global citizenship when we only vote in one country, you know, I think there's a lot of confusion. Trump got onto it, and it just resonates with a lot of people. Of course, we care about Europe. Of course, we want the NATO alliance to survive. I said that while in office. I've often said I became a therapist to the NATO countries because I said it'll be okay. We just have to work together, and you have more work to do. Help us figure it out. Help us write a new grand strategy. Help us rewrite the map of Europe. Help us rewrite the map of the globe to increase the zone of freedom. I think that's what we're really asking, but it's hard to get through it because there is a lot of noise. And frankly, there's a lot of resistance to hold on to the past. And I just don't think the past is our guide for the future.
So Thomas, I know you want to respond to that, but I also want to ask you and Ganek a question about the European pain in this moment and the European hurt and the doubt in this moment. Responding about, I think if Kiron is right, and that's the direction that the nation is going to go under its current leadership, is there a West anymore? Is there, you know, are the building blocks of what we used to presume was a solid super fortress in the world, is that gone, and what are the ramifications of that?
I mean, it depends on what you call the West. If you take it as an
call the West.
Well, there's an institutional West and there's a philosophical West. They're not necessarily the same thing. Some people misunderstand that the institutions that we built post-war are the West. They're not. The West is built on the values of the transatlantic revolutions of 1776 and 1789. That, to me, is the West. And so the institutions can change. So even the end of the European Union or NATO wouldn't mean the end of the West to me. Some people talk about European values. I don't know what European values are. I just know Western values because they're based on these universalist claims of the Enlightenment. And when I listened to a speech by the US Vice President in Munich, that is clearly an attack on that universalism. So I hear you, I respect what you said. I actually agree with it that the nation state is the prime cell of, including of universal values, because only it can produce democratic legitimacy. We agree on that, but why would a US vice president deliver a relativist speech? And knowing full well that the differences about values in the West is the changing, the frictions between basic rights that we have, and we interpret differently in the different countries, and we interpret differently over time. He chose to ignore that and berate Europeans for not a maximalist version of freedom of speech. As a German, I will say, yes, in Germany we have stricter limits on freedom of speech. But everybody in this room knows there are reasons for that. And I don't want to be told by an American vice president on the stage in Munich who's just met with the leader of the AfD about freedom of speech, and somebody who supports limits to freedoms of speech in his own administration. I don't want to be lectured to. That's simply...
Let me put this back on you. I've read your work for years, Thomas, and so maybe I won't quote more of it, but I've read you for years, and you've been an internal German critic of Germany, not recognizing its role and responsibilities as robustly as it should over the year. Isn't it helpful to some degree that Donald Trump has rolled a bowling ball into some of the inertia in the transatlantic relationship in the global system, and now Germany, Poland was already there, but France, other nations are beginning to say, wow, we've got to get our act together. Germany is coming out with very robust programs. You've taken defense spending out of the Maastricht calculations, and this has been something you've been arguing for for decades. So isn't Donald Trump your pal?
Yeah, right. Good try, Steve.
I'm right that you were arguing all this.
No, yes, you are on that front. I think Radek Sikorski made the point that since 2016, defense spending by non-American NATO members has doubled. Well, why has it? Because Donald Trump said so? Well, Mr. Stoltenberg claimed that was the case. He did that for a politically convenient reason. The reason the Europeans did that is, of course, Vladimir Putin. And the next round that we're looking at is because we feel insecurity about the future of the United States. That is going to be the next round of increases Now, you could say that that is a good thing. And it's, if you ask me for a silver lining, it could be. If we in Europe acquire the unity and the strength to be able to act on our own when there is a need, then will make us a better ally. And then we can also, in some future time, can come together with the United States on a new basis.
Mm-hmm. Nick, let me ask you the same question, but I'm going to add one other dimension to it.
I must say, with full respect, that I did not recognize the reality as we see it here in your description, because even we were such a good allies in the United States. We went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we fought, we spent, we bled, and we knew why we were doing it, to strengthen our alliance with the United States. And I mentioned Obama. I'm sure.
To be clear, Article 5 was invoked, and
I'm sure
allies came together.
you love the guy. But he was not the only one. We never had any illusions concerning the national interest of the United States. The problem is that the Trump administration quite effectively reformulated the interest in a much narrower sense that it happened. That means the allies, whether they were in Europe or Japan or Australia, were the enabler of much of United States policies. And so even if there was discrepancy in power, in military strength, etc., this was incredibly effective. And look at the Global South at the moment. Global South, look at the United States, look at us, and says we can do whatever we want. It was not the case in the past. And the problem for us is, Thomas have alluded to it, most of the European governments are both members of NATO and of the European Union. And wrongly so, this has been debated separately. Wrongly so, because the same policies are sort of regulated within the national governments.
Sure.
They know what they are doing. Look at Hungary. Hungary sings and dances in the European Union, but at NATO says, yes, sir. Why? Because the American leadership have eliminated the extravagancy of the small differences. If there is no leadership, if there is no such a leadership, the thing starts to disintegrate because everybody is going to look into national interest. And in the case of Poland, of course, the alliance with the United States within NATO, bilaterally, is the bedrock of our security. But at the same time, our economic development, on which future military spending depends, our interests are within the European Union. 75% of our trade exchange is with the European Union, 28% with Germany alone. That means if the United States thinks seriously and broadly about an interest of how to strengthen the defense capabilities of Europe, the economic strength should be of the paramount importance. But what we hear that the European Union was constructed in order to screw the United States, quote unquote. Well, if there is any logic, maybe we've heard it on Monday, but not on Wednesday. On Wednesday it would change. You know, it would be reinterpreted.
So Yannick, let me ask you a question to go a notch further, because I hear the frustration that you're expressing. I hear it across Europe.
No,
so
but let me add
yeah.
just one para.
Yeah.
With all the fascination with China, and China is...
Well, I wanted to ask you about China. I also want to ask you about India.
No, but I'm talking about Europe now.
Yeah.
It's China and its development.
Right.
The trade exchange, the investment, United States investment in China between 2023, 23 years, was $178 billion.
Yes.
In the same period of time, American investment in Europe was $4 trillion. With the European Union, with all the regulation, with the higher social obligation, etc. So where is the United States interest, especially when, as a result of the weakening of the economic development, your pensioners who invest in Europe through the pension fund will feel the pension in the United States.
So, Ganek, my question to you...
Cannot treat those
I know.
issues separate.
But listen, my question to you, hold the mic up so that you don't lose you, but my question to you is, what's the smart strategic move for Europe, given what you just said? Is it trying to talk Donald Trump back into understanding these equities? Or is it doing a deal with China? Is it doing a deal with India and sending some shocks? Is Europe going to stay in place? Because, you know, listening to Kiron wants to see a big resurgence in American power, looking at the nation state, and they're betting that Europe will follow along. My question to you is, will Europe follow along?
Yes.
Or will Europe hedge its bets?
No, Europe will follow along. The problem is that Europe, as you call it, Europe, is 27 independent nation states, which you would like to see.
How about just Poland?
And to agree on the common security policy is very difficult. It's almost impossible. So there will be a coalition, not as much of the willing, but of the enablers, those who can and want to do. And now it's Ukraine. Maybe in the future this will be the beginning of the new beginning in Europe. But Europe will follow, but the damage is done. When you have been facing the cultural war coming out of Washington, you realize that Europe will never be the same as the United States. Different culture, different history, and Europe is dangerous.
Right.
Since Hitler's Mein Kampf, we learn to read what the autocrats have been saying. And the fact that Putin is someone who's been treated better than the Allies is something which we in Warsaw worry about.
So, Kiron, I'd love to get your response on all of that, but could you add in, as you respond, two things that I'm really interested in. One is, what is it with Putin and Russia? What do we need to understand differently? And then the second piece is something I think may be more important. Every presidency, as you know, is defined eventually by a crisis. Could be a national disaster, mass casualty. It could be a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan. It could be a lot of things that could go wrong. Could be, as you were getting into, drugs, fentanyl, the distress that Americans read. But they're challenged. And I'm just wondering, as you see things going, is a Trump presidency better armed and better equipped, given what it's doing, to respond to that crisis ahead that we don't know what it will be? Or is it less able to because it's walked away from so many of the assets that it had built up?
Well, I think I just disagree with your premise that it's walked away from very much. And I disagree also with what you said at the beginning, that Trump 2.0 is very different than Trump 1.0. What's been surprising to me is how unremarkable the first few months have been, because Trump told us in the campaign what he was going to do. And at least in the US, campaigns tend to be, presidential campaigns, the most honest time for a politician, because you have to, in a nation of 300 million plus, you've got to build an unusual coalition to get to 51%, and it's getting harder and harder to do it. So one key
Just
pathway.
for clarity, I think you and I were talking in the back room that Donald Trump had a lot of people who kept him from being
right.
Trump.
And in the first term, we didn't get the full Donald Trump, because he had a lot of never-Trumpers in the Republican Party who found their way into office. There's still some, but many are leaving pretty quickly. I think that, as many have said on this stage already, it's not so much that he's a disruptor. He wants competitive thought. And I think we're getting closer to competitive thought. including from our European allies and friends, than we had in the first term. It was, no, sir, you don't understand, I have the right answer. That's tending to go away. And at least in our system of government, 99% of getting elected president is the candidate himself. Advisors play a very small role. So you have to assume there's a level of genius in whoever wins and whoever loses to even get that far. It's a unique individual. So I wouldn't count Trump out, and I wouldn't count the US out for Europe. I think we're having the wrong conversation. How do we write a new grand strategy together?
Right.
And I do think, to your point, it's not that Americans have forgotten what the Europeans did in the global war on terror and the way that you were critical after 9/11 for the United States. There's no lack of understanding of the centrality of Europe to America's own security. But on the hard empirics of it, when Trump campaigned in 2016, 4 or 5 of the NATO allies were, and I think there were 29 members, were living up to the 2% pledge of GDP toward mutual defense. And that's hard for many Americans to swallow. And 2 of those nations were Estonia and Greece. I mean, it's not exactly a good look for the West when you have teeny nations, helping hold up the West. And, that's not exactly the sheer numbers, but that was the reality. And that was a great campaign tag for Donald Trump.
Right.
And it resonated with a lot of Americans. Our closest allies can't get to 2%. Right. But we're above it. How long is this going to continue?
Could you go into Russia a little bit in the sense, I worked for Richard Nixon the last couple of years of his life, and I've dealt with lots of people who engage with Russia on all sorts of issues. They believed in engagement. A lot of Americans see something that looks like embrace. Do you agree with that? And how does Russia fit into the Trump administration's scheme of what it wants to do in foreign policy?
Yeah, I think it's to be determined, and I do think that, critics of Trump are trying to make the Russia thing in terms of false binary opposites. I don't think it's that he's in love with Putin and, he hates Europe. I just don't see that. I think he's been trying to find a way not to have a global war. So there are a couple things around Russia that I think are bigger than the specifics of the Ukraine-Russia war with him. One, he has a deep allergy to the possibility of nuclear war. And I've never heard someone in the Oval Office talk as much, and he did a lot in the campaign, about wanting to avoid nuclear war. So he looks at Russia through that lens in particular.
Can I just ask a question? So does he believe in deterrence that's hard-edged, so that if Russia were to even flirt with it, he would do what Biden did with Bill Burns and say, if you unleashed a nuclear weapon, holy hell will rain down on you? Is that the kind, because deterrence works by both sides threatening a ferocity that neither can live with?
I think when you're a nuclear-tipped nation, and if you go back to Reagan, you're doing multiple things at once. It's not all just hard power and threats. And ultimately, under Reagan, we helped end the Cold War without nuclear war, and with Reagan and Gorbachev becoming friends. And so I think it's a hard job to do both mutual cooperation and mutual defection simultaneously. And so I think Trump's trying to figure it out, and it just takes a long time. I also think with Russia, some of the backstory of this is the ridiculous Russiagate that he was subjected to. And, to make it look like, as the Clinton campaign falsely did, that he was in bed with the Russians to get elected in 2016, just put a narrative out there that doesn't exist, and it's infuriating, I think, for him. But I don't see him seeing Russia as his best friend. I think he's trying to really be a peace strategist, which may sound counterintuitive, but that's what he wants to be.
Right, Thomas, I want to ask you a question, and you're such a great conceptualizer of global systems and power and great stakeholders in the world, and I've know that you are there, and I've often wondered, in my critique of President Obama was he missed a chance to rewrite the global social contract with nations, to bring in powers that were rising. And I just think we ended up largely with inertia. We didn't get a recreation. So, you know, I'm often wondering if we basically forgot that we had the last 80 years of history in these institutions and we were to start over and create a new compelling social contract, what Kiron said around this, what would be the features of that? If we were going to scramble the transatlantic security and defense and values business to make it better and not just lament losing what we had, what would you think the features of that would look like? What would the topography be?
I think you made an important point, is that the inertia of our inability to adapt the international system to rising powers, to make them part of the game rather than resentful of the game, of what it used to be the liberal international order. And we missed that boat in the IMF, we missed it in the World Bank, less so. But overall, the transfer of agency has been much too slow. But it's not the principle on which they rest, but it's the inclusion with which we have failed to deal. But let me make one statement. What I'm seeing now in some moments reminds me of Roosevelt in 1942. He invented the term of the four policemen at the time as an idea of how to run the post-World War II world. China, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. He even talked with Molotov and Stalin about it. And the idea was that these four policemen would actually be the ones that would carry weapons. The others would be disarmed. The Security Council of today is a far echo from that. That didn't work well, or it didn't go very far, because the United States realized quickly that it couldn't run the world with two autocratic great powers. My concern today is that Donald Trump thinks of the world as three policemen. And there's pesky little democracies in between. That is my concern. And that is the challenge to Europe. Now, how to respond to that is a different story. I do believe that we should not, just because we have this moment and just because we have Donald Trump, abandoned allegiance to the United States. Right. First of all, I think the likelihood, sorry to say, Kiron, that he will fail is high, because he's collecting enemies and forces that he cannot control around the world. Also, the first one is Vladimir Putin. I mean, he bets on Vladimir Putin's statesmanship, that he actually realizes how much goodies he's getting from the United States and then calls it quits, cashes them in. But Vladimir Putin is a maximalist. I also don't believe, not yet anyway, that the American people stand for it, because I disagree with you, Kiron, in that this was all said in the campaign. The campaign, a peace-loving isolationist was announced. What we got is a more aggressive nationalist. Right. I think we had a lack of fantasy from Trump 1.0 to Trump 2.0. We thought it was a linear progression from one to the other, maybe radicalized a bit. We would see more complaints about defense spending, tariffs renewed, and so forth. But that we would get a completely different foreign policy makeup in the way I've described it. I don't think, at least for me, I lack that type of fantasy.
Let me just, in the next few minutes we have, I'd love to get Genic and Kiron to pivot off something you said, and then I want to get a couple of questions from the audience on the time. But Genic, I want to get into this question about democracy, because I think that is really the wiring of society and whether democracies can pay off. Now, I have to be honest, in the U.S. case, I can see Kiron's case because it matches a lot of my family. I can also see a lot of others on the other side of it think that America is making some irrational decisions about its power. The country is divided. Let's just be honest. The country is divided down the middle, and there are two worldviews. One sees the end of democracy. The other sees it was their democratic vote that changed things in a different way. I'm interested in what's going on in Europe and the solvency of democracy here. You have an election around the corner in Poland. And we also have the example, you just talked about China. I mean, China is a highly successful illiberal system that has gained, I mean, it's spectacular what China has achieved, and China was never supposed to be a success story with a command and control economy, with the Central Committee Party of the Communist Party making decisions and undermining it. And so there are bigger threats to the solvency of our societies than maybe just this competition. So I just want to get a take on your view on these bigger forces, particularly about the solvency of democracy in the eyes of Europeans, and whether or not, as you think about China or others, is that not an opportunity somehow for the US and Europe to come back together? But we'll go with Genic and then Kiron, and hopefully a last word with Thomas.
I don't think we can cover this within a few minutes. I mean, we have such a conflict, such a deep conflict in the United States and in Poland, to the extent that in both countries, television programs and some newspapers advise people how to spend Christmas without killing each other. You know, family Christmas around the table. The problem is that we are not talking politics anymore. We are talking deeply held values or certain preconceptions based on the cultural experience or on needs of the American people, as you have described them, which I do not quarrel. You know, you know, in Poland traditionally, compromise was a dirty word. Well, we somehow learn and relearn this, you know, art of compromise, but it's been lost again in this political struggle. We have a problem with the Populist International. I don't like the name. I call them sovereignists. That means we have in almost...
Okay, one more time.
Sovereignists.
Okay, sovereignists.
You know, so it's not about only nation state. It's nation states going alone. It's Poland first, it's Hungary first, it's Slovakia first, you know, Malta first,
Brexit.
if you wish, you know, etc., etc. The concept... interestingly enough, very many of those parties, not in Poland, are anti-establishment, do not trust any kind of expertise, whether from the left or from the right. They believe in ideologies. And they are pro-Russian. Some of them, like AfD, are also anti-American, but they do not proclaim it. You know. So,
Pro-Trump and anti-Russian.
And they are pro-Russian, basically. Why? Because the establishment is anti-Russian. It's not probably some kind of a very complex political reasoning that we go with Russia against the United States.
Not thoughtful.
It is just we don't want to repeat what the establishment or previous establishment. You know, the fact of the matter is that since 1989, Poland did not look any so-called third way. But the consecutive governments, whether from the center, liberal, left, post-communist, or from the right, have continued the path of transformation, and we became one of the most successful economically states in Europe. Now, since a few years, this has been put into question. And even there is some part of the Polish electorate that says we would be better off outside of the European Union, which is a total rubbish.
Right.
You know. So I can't, you know, there are different forms of democracy. British democracy is different from the electoral democracy in Poland and in other countries. They are presidential systems, and they have proven their strength, but their terrible weakness. Because there is something like institutional memory which helps you to make a correct decision. And I fear, I am not certain, but I fear that institutional memory have been lost in today's White House. And when you mention long telegram by George Kennan, I think the lessons drawn from the telegram should be read and reread by the National Security Council, every member.
Fascinating. Thank you. Kiron?
I would like to say, in terms of thinking in kind of a macro sense, the liberal international order or the rules-based order, that's a terms that get used all the time, it crashed a long time ago. And so to say that Trump is likely to fail is to misunderstand that the system we put in place failed. And, you know, he's just getting started. That order failed for a number of reasons. I think it ran out of steam. I think it began to favor certain elites who could manipulate it. I think that it was forged in a way that's already been agreed upon on this stage to favor certain nations and not others. So when the order was established, it wasn't a democratic order for all. It was really a Western Atlantic world order, Anglo-American order, but we had the non-aligned movement on the sideline, and we ignored it. And so there's Egypt and India, and they're forming. Now those nations, we call them the Global South, they're all grown up. They may be politically fragile, some of them, but they're politically mature. And I actually think the Trump doctrine is more trained to figuring out how to incorporate parts of the Global South into the order when, whatever order we have, when the kind of liberal elites continue to ignore them. So I think this is a big opening for us, and it's not lost on Americans that our Secretary of State and our Deputy Secretary of State are both Spanish-speaking and have served and are focusing more on the Western Hemisphere than at any time in our nation, except when we were trying to invade nations.
So let's get a couple of questions here. I've got one right. Do we have a mic runner in here? Oh, you've got the mic. Okay. Tell us who you are, and we're going to make it real brief, okay?
Okay, Andrei Larionov. So, Karen, just you mentioned this conversation between Reagan and Gorbachev, comparing with the current ones. Let me say, Mr. Putin is not Mr. Gorbachev, and Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan. And also, I have a trouble to understand how to praise Putin and his allies around the world and blame Zelensky in Ukraine could help workers in Pennsylvania and Minnesota. But my question is actually seems to me the most interesting part of this conversation, at least for me. This discussion between Karen, you and Thomas on fundamental issues, not on the current policy. What is the West and what are Western values? Please tell us, each of you, if you can, not on at national level, not freedom of speech, something like, but at international level. What does it mean to be Western in international relations?
Let's get the mic to this gentleman and do both together so we can stay on time. And thank you very much. So what's the West? Who are you?
Patrick Labuda, Central European University. I mean, it's a question, comment. I'll try to make it brief.
You have to make it brief.
Yes,
I'll cut you off if you don't.
I guess the question that I have to the European panelists in particular is, I mean, is it not time to reimagine Europe without the United States? How many times are we going to get betrayed, you know, quote unquote, that was the phrase that was used. How many times is this going to happen? So that's question one, and? No, so that's the question. How many times does this have to happen for us to plan without the United States, plan for a future without the United States, a new world, a multipolar world where the United States is not with Europe?
Thank you. So let's go down, and we have two great questions. One is, how do you define the West and think about the West in its transnational, global, international sense? Really good question. And then secondly, I think all of you have touched on it, is what is the future, particularly Gennett, what is the future of Europe in planning for a future of Europe, not necessarily dependent or integrated with the United States? Why don't we start with Gennett?
Right, first of all, we invest...
can you take the mic?
First of all, we invest into the alliance with the United States within NATO and bilateral. And I think that this is, we cannot avoid this kind of approach. Europe is not prepared as yet to build a credible deterrence against possible Russia invasion. That's what. Can I imagine Europe without the United States? To the same extent as I can imagine the United States without Europe. That means how the United States on her own will face China. It's not possible if Europe will not join agreed policy regarding China, regarding Global South. regarding Iran, etc., United States will be forced either to go back home or to militarize even more its political posture, because otherwise it will not get things done.
Thank you. Kiron, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I agree that I can't imagine a world where there's not at the core of it for a U.S.-European alliance and NATO within it being the, the main security belt for the Atlantic world. But I think it will look different. NATO's 75. And I don't know if anyone is 75 years old in this room, but at 75, you have different problems than when you were 40. And sometimes you need a little surgery. And I think the alliance is mature, it's old, and it's got to rethink itself. This is a really creative moment, and I think it's a good moment in the NATO alliance. And also, the fights in the family are always the most bruising and hurtful, and I think some of that's going on in the U.S. European conversation now. Let me go quickly to the first question, which I think gets to the essence of what's really going on. We're trying to figure out Western values, and I think maybe VP Vance, stumbled from your perspective when he talked about, gave a lecture on freedom of speech, but at the core of everything is freedom. And what does it look like now? And we've got to come to a new understanding of freedom at both within our nations and between each other, and it's really hard. Freedom is hard to hold on to. There's really no democracy if we quash freedom, and that's been happening a lot, even in our own nation.
Thank you. Thomas, I'm going to do the last word to you.
The West, to me, is the translation of individual rights and individual freedoms into a political project that entails the minority rights, the division of labor, the rule of law, and so forth. So to me, the West is not a location, but it is an open project for all who embrace these values. So therefore, I don't think the term global West is a defamation of the way. It's a true statement to me. Do we have to prepare for Europe without the U.S.? I agree with Genek. We have to invest in the alliance with the United States and continue to do so, but with, well, if that's necessary,
learn to play golf.
But with the understanding in mind that the United States might think differently about it, since we're seeing a secular change of foreign policy attitudes in the United States. Therefore, prepare for the alliance, be ready for something else.
Well, listen, I think that, one of the, I love this conference at PISM. It brings together people of different perspective. We had a very civil discussion of different views about the future. This is exactly what should happen in these conferences. This is exciting, and I want to thank the three of you so much for bringing your A game to this discussion. Let's give a big round of applause to Timus Kleine-Brockhoff, Genek Smolar, and Kiron Skinner. Thank you all very, very much. I'm going to finish with just one little note about golf. And this is maybe sound like a non sequitur, but it's kind of fun because I had it in my TV show this week. Years ago, in 2009, I interviewed Ali Larijani, then the nuclear negotiator for Iran. And Iran and nuclear issues may be in the news in a week or two with what's going on. That is something that President Trump's very involved with. And I asked him, I said, well, how are these nuclear negotiations going? And he says, you Americans play golf, we play chess. So I mentioned this to Prince Turki Al Faisal, who was the Saudi ambassador. And I said, well, what do you think? And he says, well, they may play chess, but we in Saudi Arabia play a game called Mukagil or something, which is played roughly with the knuckles of camels. So you have to kind of figure out what game you're playing. But thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for this intense conversation. Steve, would you please come over here? I wanted to follow up on a couple of topics that you discussed.
Okay, great. I could not hear you, so say that one more time.
No, just I just invited you here. So just to be brief, what are the main takeaways from this discussion? Do we need to redefine the transatlantic relations, or maybe just a fine-tuning will do?
I think the transatlantic relationship is like scrambled eggs right now. And it's got a new topography that we will see. We will see new mountains, new rivers, new chasms, greater distance in some areas and closer distance on others. What I heard was that we have a lot of tension coming ahead and that there's going to be no easy kumbaya story in solving this. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty and a lot of trial and error, and those errors are going to be painful. And it won't solve the lament that many people feel for the change that has come after so many years of dependability. This is now over, and there's going to be a new era, and we're just going to have to fight it out.
Sure, and the last thing for today, as a journalist, what is the one headline you'd write after moderating this panel? What would it be?
Oh, I'm really bad at headlines. Well, I'd say what I did before. It was, coming off of time. The time for illusions is over.
Nice, very well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the first day of PISM Strategic Ark. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your engagement, for your insights, for presence here in Warsaw. And today's conversation, navigated the complexities of transatlantic strategy, the evolving global financial order, and the shifting landscape of democratic resilience. Each session gave us something to reflect on and a lot to prepare for.
We're hoping to see you tomorrow. We will reconvene for another day of fruitful discussions, starting on the main stage at 10 a.m. See you then.
Thank you.